The Wife by Washington Irving. The treasures of the deep are not so precious as are the concealed comforts of a man locked up in woman's love. I scent the air of blessings when I come but near the house. What a delicious breath marriage sends forth! The violet beds not sweeter. Middleton. I have often had the occasion to remark the fortitude with which women sustain the most overwhelming reverses of fortune, those disasters which break down the spirit of a man and prostrate him in the dust, seem to call forth all energies of the softer sex, and give such intrepidity and elevation to their character that at times it approaches to sublimity. Nothing can be more touching than to behold a soft and tender female who had been all weakness and dependence and alive to every trivial roughness while treading the prosperous paths of life, suddenly rising in mental force to be the comforter and support of her husband under misfortune, and abiding with unshrinking firmness the bitterest blasts of adversity. As the vine, which has long twined its graceful foliage about the oak and been lifted by it into sunshine, will, when the hardy plant is rifted by the thunderbolt, cling round it with its caressing tendrils and bind up its shattered boughs, so is it beautifully ordered by Providence that woman, who is the mere dependent and ornament of man in his happier hours, should be his stay and solace when smitten with sudden calamity. Winding herself into the rugged recesses of his nature, tenderly supporting the drooping head and binding up the broken heart. I was once congratulating a friend who had around him a blooming family knit together in the strongest affection. "I can wish you no better lot," said he with enthusiasm, "than to have a wife and children. If you are prosperous, there they are to share your prosperity. If otherwise, there they are to comfort you. And indeed, I have observed that a married man falling into misfortune is more apt to retrieve his situation in the world than a single one, partly because he is more stimulated to exertion by the necessities of the helpless and beloved beings who depend upon him for subsistence, but chiefly because his spirits are soothed and relieved by domestic endearments, and his self-respect kept alive by finding that, though all abroad is darkness and humiliation, yet there is still a little world of love at home of which he is the monarch. Whereas a single man is apt to run to waste and self-neglect, to fancy himself lonely and abandoned, and his heart to fall to ruin like some deserted mansion for want of an inhabitant. These observations call to mind a little domestic story of which I was once a witness. My intimate friend Leslie had married a beautiful and accomplished girl who had been brought up in the midst of fashionable life. She had, it is true, no fortune, but that of my friend was ample, and he delighted in the anticipation of indulging her in every elegant pursuit, and administering to those delicate tastes and fancies that spread a kind of witchery about the sex. "Her life," said he, "shall be like a fairy tale." The very difference in their characters produced a harmonious combination. He was of a romantic and somewhat serious cast, she was all life and gladness. I have often noticed the mute rapture with which he would gaze upon her in company, of which her sprightly powers made her the delight, and how, in the midst of applause, her eyes would still turn to him, as if there alone she sought favour and acceptance. When leaning on his arm, her slender form contrasted finely with his tall, manly person. The fond, confiding air with which she looked up at him seemed to call forth a flush of triumphant pride and cherishing tenderness, as if he doted on his lovely burden for its very helplessness. Never did a couple set forward on the flowery path of early and well-suited marriage with a fairer prospect of felicity.
It was the misfortune of my friend, however, to have embarked his property in large speculations, and he had not been married many months when by a succession of sudden disasters it was swept from him, and he found himself reduced almost to penury. For a time he kept his situation to himself, and went about with a haggard countenance and a breaking heart. His life was but a protracted agony, and what rendered it more insupportable was the necessity of keeping up a smile in the presence of his wife, for he could not bring himself to overwhelm her with the news. She saw, however, with the quick eye of affection, that all was not well with him. She marked his altered looks and stifled sighs, and was not to be deceived by his sickly and vapid attempts at cheerfulness. She tasked all her sprightly powers and tender blandishments to win him back to happiness, but she only drove the arrow deeper into his soul. The more he saw cause to love her, the more torturing was the thought that he was soon to make her wretched. A little while, thought he, and the smile will vanish from that cheek, the song will die away from those lips, the lustre of those eyes will be quenched with sorrow, and the happy heart which now beats lightly in that bosom will be weighted down, like mine, by the cares and miseries of the world. At length he came to me one day, and related his whole situation in the deepest despair. When I heard him through, I inquired, "Does your wife know all this?" At the question he burst into an agony of tears. "For God's sake," he cried, "if you have any pity on me, don't mention my wife. It is the thought of her that drives me almost to madness." "And why not?" said I. "She must know it sooner or later. You cannot keep it long from her, and the intelligence may break upon her in a more startling manner than if imparted by yourself, for the accents of those we love soften the harshest tidings. Besides, you are depriving yourself of the comforts of her sympathy, and not merely that, but also endangering the only bond that can keep hearts together, and unreserved community of thought and feeling. She will soon perceive that something is secretly preying upon your mind, and true love will not brook reserve. It feels undervalued and outraged when even the sorrows of those it loves are concealed from it. Oh, but my friend, to think what a blow I am to give to all her future prospects, how I am to strike her very soul to the earth by telling her that her husband is a beggar, that she is to forego all the elegancies of life, all the pleasures of society, to shrink with me into indigence and obscurity, to tell her that I have dragged her down from the sphere in which she might have continued to move in constant brightness, the light of every eye, the admiration of every heart. How can she bear poverty? She has been brought up in all the refinements of opulence. How can she bear neglect? She has been the idol of society. Oh, it will break her heart! It will break her heart!" I saw his grief was eloquent, and I let it have its flow, for sorrow relieves itself with words. When his paroxysm had subsided, and he had relapsed into moody silence, I resumed the subject gently, and urged him to break his situation at once to his wife. He shook his head mournfully, but positively. "But how are you going to keep it from her? It is necessary she should know it, that you may take the steps proper to the alteration of your circumstances. You must change your style of living." Nay, observing a pang to pass across his countenance, "don't let that afflict you. I am sure you have never placed your happiness in outward show. You have yet friends, warm friends, who will not think the worse of you for being less splendidly lodged, and surely it does not require a palace to be happy with Mary." "I could be happy with her in a hovel," he cried convulsively. "I could go down with her into poverty and the dust. I could. God bless her! God bless her!" he cried, bursting into a transport of grief and tenderness. "And believe me, my friend," I said, stepping up and grasping him warmly by the hand, "believe me, she can be the same with you. Aye, more. It will be a source of pride and triumph to her. It will call forth all the latent energies and fervent sympathies of her nature, for she will rejoice to prove that she loves you for yourself. There is in every true woman's heart a spark of heavenly fire, which lies dormant in the broad daylight of prosperity, but which kindles up and beams and blazes in the dark hour of adversity. No man knows what a wife of his bosom is, no man knows what a ministering angel she is, unless he has gone with her through the fiery trials of this world. There was something in the earnestness of my manner and the figurative language of my language that caught the excited imagination of Leslie. I knew the auditor I had to deal with, and following up the impression I had made, I finished by persuading him to go home and unburden his sad heart to his wife. I must confess,